is 9 o'clock Pacific time and time for us to get started. So welcome everyone to today's Rails Online Conference. I'm Catherine Barrett with O'Reilly Media, and we have a really great lineup today. I know we all want to get started as soon as possible, so I'm going to cover a couple things quickly and then turn it over to our team. Now, first of all, we're streaming the audio portion of this event. I hear from some people that they're getting an error, a connect fill error, and we're looking into that. So I want to encourage you, if you can, to dial in for the audio portion, and we'll have people post that information in the chat room right now. We do have toll-free numbers, and we have global dial-in numbers, so that should cover anyone. If you're listening to the streaming audio, it's usually just great. It can have a tendency to become choppy or cut out on you. Now, if that happens, just stop the audio broadcast and restart it, and that will usually take care of whatever problems you're having. Be sure also to adjust the volume both on your computer and in the audio controls in WebEx. So, and that way you shouldn't have any trouble at all. And next, we encourage you to ask questions and share your comments throughout the event. And to do this, we're using the chat window just as you've been using. Please post to all participants, not all attendees, but all participants. And that way everyone can join in the conversation. It makes it much more interesting. Now, when you post a question, please preface it with a cue so it stands out and our moderators can grab it. And I think Chad just showed us what that should look like. Thank you, Chad. Now, if you have any technical difficulties, please send those directly to me. I'm listed as online conferences, or we have several members of our conference team in here too. And if you know who those are, you can send directly to them. We're looking into the connect fail problem right now. I'm sorry, I don't know what it is, but we're in touch with WebEx and trying to figure out what that is. And we'll have an answer for you. So I encourage you to dial in if you're getting that. And one other thing, the touchy issue, we've been having some problems with WebEx, with Macs lately, and this has happened in several recent events where a slew of Mac users, maybe 30 or so, will get disconnected all at once. And WebEx is looking into it, but they have not yet resolved the problem. They finally identified it. Now, this is a Mac-heavy group today. All of our presenters are on Macs, and we're all on Macs. So we do expect this to happen periodically, unfortunately. If it does happen, if you get disconnected, just log back in. Wait a moment and log back in. If we see it happen, we'll accommodate that by waiting for a moment as long as we can without derailing the conversation. But, you know, please just bear with us. It's out of our control right now, and we'll just all, if we get disconnected, log back into the meeting and do our best to deal with that. And let's see, if you're a Twitter user, our hashtag today is RailsOLC. Please include that in your post. And finally, you should know that we're recording this event, and we'll have the recording available in just a couple days, and we'll send everyone a note as soon as we have that. And I think that's about it. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ben and Chad, and we'll get started. So take it away, gentlemen.
Hi, everybody. This is Ben. Welcome to the first Rails Online Conference. We got 2 hours of pretty fantastic content for you. As you all know, the Rails 3 beta came out less than 2 weeks ago, so we're excited to be sort of on the cutting edge here. And I'll be introducing each of the speakers as we go. So let's get started. First up, we've got Yehuda Katz. Everybody knows Yehuda. He's been speaking all over the place about Rails 3. He's been leading a lot of the charge since the merge to get this out, and we're all thankful for that. He's working at Engine Yard, and we're also fortunate, in addition to him leading the charge, that he's full-time on open source projects, which means that Rails 3 for the first time has had someone full-time working on it. Without further ado then, we've got Rails 3, the beta overview.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Somebody just say yes, and then I'll move on. All right, sweet. Wow, that's a lot of yes. Okay. So I'm going to talk today about Rails 3. I'm going to do a fair bit of high level since there's a lot of other people giving a more low level thing, and I would definitely encourage everybody to take a look at blog posts that go into a lot more detail. I'm just sort of giving the big picture story of what's going on here. So first of all, I'm Yehuda. I'm going to move quickly here. I work for EngineYard. That was already discussed, so I'll move on. I work on jQuery, which I give a lot of time to, and it turns out that doing that has made a lot of difference in terms of getting the UJS support in Rails working well, and also having jQuery work well with Rails. Like jQuery 1.4 just added support for Rails-style param serialization, and I've been very involved in trying to do some integration between the two, and I think that's been very helpful and good to have someone in both places. I also work on Rails, as you know. I used to work on MERB. That merged into Rails, and now I work on that. So I also pair with Carl. We have a hashtag and a Twitter account and an IRC channel and a Gmail account and Twitter account, and a GitHub account, and etc. And I would definitely encourage you to seek that out if you have any questions. In particular, the IRC channel for Carl Yehuda is pretty busy, and it's a good place to go if during the day you have a question about something you know we're working on full time. So we hang out in there during the day, and it's a good place to hang out. I also work in the same room as the guys who work on EngineYard Cloud, which has turned out to be pretty cool because EngineYard Cloud has very different requirements from something like a 37 Signals app. It's doing many more very pure Ruby things and a lot less sorts of things that make use of typical Rails features. But at the same time, it gains a lot of benefit from being able to reuse tools that come with Rails or came with MERB. And so working with the EngineYard Cloud guys closely has been very helpful in terms of driving some of how Rails is maturing and thinking about the world in the future. So the first big thing about Rails 3, the top level feature, is choice. And as you know, there's this notion of the paradox of choice, right? And the reason why we came to Rails in the first place is because we don't like to have to make so many choices. So Rails 3 is kind of an interesting release in that we've created the ability to have a huge amount of new choices, but we kind of came to Rails not to have so many choices, right? So this is a tricky problem. And what I would say about that, about choices in general, is that real users, are more important than choices. In particular, you should get real users before you make choices, and you should let your users drive your choices. So the big question with a Rails app, it's not so much that you never want to have to make any choices at all. It's that the choices that you have to make should come out of real requirements. They should come out of actual users using an actual app telling you that something that you're doing isn't quite right. But when we actually look at what's going on, so this is New Relic's survey of what's being used, and this is right now where choice isn't necessarily so easy in Rails 2. You can see that already something like a quarter of all Rails users are using a different template engine, not only just jQuery, but the jQuery Rails plugin. So there's more than a quarter of people probably using jQuery, and about a quarter of people are using RSpec. So we have a really significant number of people in some key areas really starting to take a look, and historically taking a look at other options. So it's not really good enough for us to say, we have the default stack, you have to do what you want to do. You have to listen to us, and if you want to do something else, go ahead and hack. Because it just turns out that the question, what is yellow and what is blue in this graph? Yellow is people using it, and blue is everybody else. So it's just to make it so that you can see out of 100. So it turns out that people make choices anyway. So it's not really helpful for us to say choices are bad, paradox of choice, because people are finding ways to make choices anyway. So we should find ways to make it easy to make those choices, less disruptive, and easy to defer the choices as much as possible. So some examples of choices that you can make: you can change the JavaScript library that you use easily, you can change the ORM library, you can change the testing framework, you can change the template language. Middleware, Brian's going to talk about this later. Middleware gives you the ability to add in a lot of arbitrary things, so this just allows you to wrap your requests in a lot of different ways, in ways that are not really Rails specific at all, which is very cool. And we're also paying a lot of attention now to alternative Ruby VMs like JRuby and Rubinius. I've actually been working with Evan for the past couple of weeks on getting active support green on Rubinius, and I think he's a couple of bugs away now. And JRuby has also been working with us on making everything work. And we're really committed to having an experience where JRuby, Rubinius, and any other Ruby VM that's able to run Rails runs smoothly out of the box. And that's something that historically maybe hasn't been true. People were having to run special generators after they ran just to get things working, and we want that to all work just right. And the big way that this works, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I posted on my blog about this to some degree. The big picture issue here is that there's a new concept of a rail tie. And a rail tie is basically just a part of Rails that used to be part of this huge monolithic rail ties. There used to be one framework called rail ties that had everything. And now each of those pieces that used to be part of Rails has its own rail tie. And essentially all that just means is that every part of Rails is now its own plugin. And when you get a plugin, when you get a rail tie like ActiveRecord, it gets a lot of things that you're used to having in Rails. So you're used to having config.ActiveRecord, your own generators, your own rate tasks, your own view helpers, logging, initialization that happens very early in the process. So plugins historically have been limited in terms of when they could hook into the process. ActiveRecord has, in Rails 2.3, magical access to very early parts of the initialization. And in Rails 3, Data Mapper gets all that. Well, not config.ActiveRecord, but it gets all that, right? So what that means is that we've basically made a situation where all parts of Rails have a very clear place where they declare the hook points, and everything is really just a plugin. So modularity. A real question that you should be asking yourself about modularity, since we talk about it a lot with Rails 3, right, is why should you care? I think it's a good question. When you're an end user of Rails, all this modularity, why does it matter to you? Why should you care? It matters to me because I work on Rails and I like to be able to maintain it, and that's good for me. But why is this a top-level feature that you as a user should care about? And the answer is you don't, yet. And the reason for that is that the modularity is actually an investment in the future. Modularity is not something that you can see a good payoff for right away. And in fact, you see a little bit of a dip in the short term. But what you get long term is better plugin stability, because now that we have, for instance, this idea of a rail tie, and Data Mapper uses it, and Data Mapper, let's say, replaces all the ActiveRecord's rate tasks, you don't have to worry about it potentially, whatever hack they were hooking into the initializer through some alias method chain of a method in the initializer suddenly breaking in a future release. So you don't actually so that's a big boon. In the short term, we get a lot of people having to take their plugins and making them work against new APIs. But in the long term, we should see significantly better plugin stability. So it's really an investment in that. It's also an investment in improving your ability to make choices. And again, this is something that, because we live in a world of Ruby, people have done a really good job of making this seem like this has always existed. But in fact, there are some things that you were just simply not able to do. You were not able to replace the generators in when you did a script generate model to use Data Mapper. You had to do something like script generate Data Mapper model. So there were a lot of little quirks about how you had to work with alternatives that weren't quite right. You had to generate RSpec, and then you had to generate an RSpec model, right? And in Rails 3, those things are all just Lego pieces that fit together. Whatever your ORM is gets special hook during the generator. Whatever your test framework is gets a special hook during the generator, and it goes to town. So we've really made an investment in people being able to provide improved choices in the future. It also provides improved maintainability for us and for people contributing. So in addition to it being just better for people working directly on Rails all the time, which is nice, it makes it easier for you as a contributor to go in and surgically make a change because things are much less coupled. So you can actually say, oh, here's where the problem is. This doesn't seem to actually be connected to very much else. There's a good API here that connects it to everything else. Oh, I can see. I just make that change. It also allows us to take some components that were historically part of Rails and move them into the community. So it becomes a lot easier for us to depend on things because now we have components like Arrow that are maintained by other people. Rails doesn't have to maintain Arrow, which is the sort of querying library. It's maintained by people who are really passionate and care a lot about querying. And that's also a boon because long term it'll mean that we get more people who are passionate and interested in doing things. A really good example of this is the UJS split between the Rails now emitting HTML markup and JavaScript libraries consuming it, I got about 10 patches from a guy on the jQuery team who knows nothing about Rails to the jQuery UJS driver because he knows JavaScript. And he can go, oh, I know about JavaScript. You were making a mistake here in your implementation of the UJS stuff. So that becomes a big boon as well. Finally, it provides appropriate hook points. And when I say appropriate hook points, I mean providing actual things that are really make sense for you to hook into, as opposed to trying to dig around and find a useful place. So this lets us say, these seem like really common things that people are doing. Let's provide a good place for you to hook into it. A good example of this is rack. So rack is another thing where you might be wondering, why should I care? And the answer is that it just provides a really awesome way for people to extend and modify HTTP in Rails, which solves a lot of the things that I just talked about, maintainability and choice and providing good hook points. Okay, another big feature, dependencies. So Rails 3 has a lot of dependencies. If you install Rails 3, you'll notice there's a bunch of dependencies. Merv had some dependencies. Rails actually has more dependencies. When you have a lot of dependencies, a big problem that starts to happen is management. And the problem with dependencies is that when you just rely on something simple like Ruby gems to install your dependencies, it's pretty easy to get dependency conflicts. So, this problem is not really a new problem, but it becomes more acute when you use more dependencies. So for people that were already using a lot of gems, they've already experienced the problems of gem management. But Rails had done a nice thing for everybody in that it had basically no dependencies, so the chances of conflicts with Rails applications was low, and then Rails also encouraged use of plugins which didn't have dependencies, which further mitigated the problem of dependency conflicts. However, what all this led to was implicit dependency conflicts that resulted in weird runtime production bugs and things like that, or just a lot more mental overhead when you install things to make sure everything is all set up. So it gets more acute with Rails, but it's not really a new problem at all. And it becomes more acute because Rails 3 is encouraging gem plugins so that we can actually have dependencies. So a gem plugin could depend on a specific version of I18N, and Rails itself has dependencies. And we've solved this problem by and large with Bundler. And there's definitely some growing pains with Bundler, but the idea behind Bundler is to provide a way for you to specify all your dependencies, all the versions, and then do a proper dependency resolution of everything and install all the gems that you need, and then you have them. For people that are using Bundler that are experiencing small issues, definitely keep letting us know, but just be aware that life without Bundler with the amount of dependencies, especially once you start adding gem plugins, you should try it and then check it out. For people who are curious about Bundler, there's basically three things you need to know. There's bundle install, which installs a gem bundle. There's bundler.setup, which sets up the load path, and bundler.require, which requires the main file for a gem. You can check out more details in the README, but those are the three things you need to know, and bundler.setup and bundler.require are generated for you in your application.rb, so you don't have to worry about that. The main thing to do is just when you get an application or while you're working on an application, you can just keep running bundle install to keep things up to date. Trying to go from 08 to 09, there's actually a pretty big section in the README about that. You should check into it. And if you still have issues, let me know. Next big thing is ActionMailer. The first thing is that ActionMailer got a new mail gem, and probably the coolest thing about it is that it goes through the Enron database, which has like 500,000 emails and doesn't crash. So it's hard to know if it correctly parses it, but it successfully parses 500,000 emails in a real-world database, which is pretty cool. It's a big thing for Ruby that we have it. And Rails 3's ActionMailer now uses that gem. It also moved a lot of hacks that we were putting into ActionMailer on top of Tmail and moved them into the proper location in a real mail gem. We also added this new API. So ActionMailer, as you know, historically has been sort of a redheaded stepchild, and we wanted to bring it up to conceptually look like what ActionController looks like. So you get something similar to respond to. You say mail to a recipient, and then you provide format. Unlike ActionMailer, which ActionController, which picks one of these formats and sends it on depending on the request. in ActionMailer, all the formats get rendered, but otherwise these are conceptually simple. There's a question, how can gems installed by bundler be accessed? It's in tilde, your home, slash dot bundler. The second big feature is ActiveModel, and the big thing about ActiveModel is that we dog fooded, so we extracted a bunch of features from ActiveRecord, put them into ActiveModel, and then just use those ActiveModel features in ActiveRecord. So the big thing is that it's just a decoupling of how ActiveRecord works, so that things that aren't about SQL persistence are moved out into a library that people can use who aren't worried about ActiveRecord. So we used to have this thing called ActiveRecord. Basically, it just changed, so now there's ActiveRecord and ActiveModel. The nice thing about ActiveModel is that you can use it with your Ruby class. So obviously you can use it in an ORM if you want, but you can also use it in whatever Ruby class you desire. And you get, these are some examples, you get things like validation, serialization, callbacks and observers. There's also dirty tracking and some other things. And you can apply those to your Ruby class. So suddenly you can do validates presence of in some arbitrary code in lib, and you can serialize it to JSON without or with, provide methods, basically the same thing as ActiveRecord. Also, as a second part of this decoupling, there used to be ActionPack used to call directly into ActiveRecord. And the thing about ActionPack, depending on ActiveRecord, meant that having something like DataMapper or SQL interoperate was okay, but not great. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of things peppered throughout ActionPack that are really nice conveniences that used to rely on ActiveRecord specifically. So redirecting to something, rendering something, doing a form for, linking to it, in the router specifying a resource, and then having a path for it. These are actually the reasons why we use Rails. I think people have gotten used to all this stuff, and if you don't know about it, you should look into it. But this idea of objects, arbitrary objects have URLs that you can point to and all that is actually a very important part of how Rails works. And if you use DataMapper in 2.3, there was simply no way to hook into it without just trying to look at ActionPack and emulate all the implicit interfaces. What Rails 3 does is it just says ActionPack doesn't actually care about ActiveRecord. It cares about a small ActiveModel API that either an ORM or your own plain Ruby objects can implement. This is mainly nice for if you have your own Ruby object to allow you to do more interesting things with Ruby objects, which haven't historically been a pattern. So it's probably not so obvious what you might do with this, but I think there are definitely patterns that can emerge from making it really easy to use a plain old Ruby object in the context of the resource-oriented framework. Basically, DataMapper and SQL use this API, and DataMapper already has a plugin that does all the things I talked about earlier in terms of generation and ratecast, and also provides an API that matches the ActiveModel API.
Hey, Yehuda, this is Chad. I just wanted to let you know we have 5 minutes, including questions.
Okay, I'll keep asking questions, and I'll try to answer while I go. I'll move quickly. The router. Main thing about the router is that it's less verbose. Stuff like this works. So you have like match/home to homepage index. Yes, the ActiveModel API, there's a lint for it that you can include in the test case, and it will spit out whether or not the thing that you're doing actually matches. There's constraints. I think this is probably the biggest feature of Rails 3. You can do constraints either ad hoc in a hash, or you can do constraints as an object, but you can actually start to do really complex stuff in a constraint that allows you to put things that really belong as routing logic in the router instead of in a controller. And finally, you can actually go to any rack app. Again, this is an investment in the future. There aren't necessarily a huge amount of rack apps, but it means that you can actually go to Sinatra app right now and then any other rack application that people build over time. XSS safety is another huge feature that's user-facing. And the thing about XSS safety is basically just, it means you don't have to worry about escaping stuff anymore. What you have to worry about is unescaping stuff that you didn't mean to escape, which is something that you'll actually notice if you escape something, as opposed to something, not the other way around where you have to remember to always escape something has led to like Twitter getting hacked. So we looked at a bunch of cases where high-profile Rails apps were getting hacked, and what we decided was that the canonical solution to the XSS problem, which is blacklisting everything and having to whitelist specific things that were safe, was the correct solution. And we put a lot of elbow grease into it to make it feel pretty good. So like Rails helpers themselves are marked as safe, and only the user data is not marked as safe, for instance. Active relation is a big deal. For me, the biggest deal about active relation is that it creates queries that are not immediately executed. So you have stuff like post.where, and then if you have a cache block that uses those posts, then if the thing is cached, it will just never hit the database. So you can actually start doing clever things where in your index, you queue up a whole big post, a whole big collection of posts, which is really just a relation, and you can have a helper that further filters that down, but you don't actually go and hit the database until later. And if you put in a cache block, I think that's a pretty awesome pattern that I think we'll start seeing more use of. Metal is probably the last thing here, and the thing about Metal is that we also dog-fooded it. So there used to be this thing called Metal, which is basically just allowing you to use rack apps in Rails applications, but it turned out that people constantly wanted to use stuff like rendering or layouts or conditional get. They wanted to use facilities that Rails already provided in their Metal. And so what we've basically done is we've created a really lightweight super class controller called Metal, which ActionController base extends from, and then provided all the facilities that go into ActionController base as modules. A bare Metal, so ActionController Metal itself, is just as fast as Rails 2.3 Metal, but you can opt in now to all these additional features for obviously additional performance costs. So you can opt into rendering or callbacks or e-tags. You can opt into having a request and response accessor instead of having to look directly in the environment. And it has a basic API that you can use, which allows things like rendering to talk to response body, content type, location, status, and modify the headers without having to use the request and response objects, which are a little bit heavy for very simple Metal type applications. And that's it. I'll take a look at, just to wrap up the last slide that I was saying, which is basically most people probably won't need Metal, but if you felt the need for Metal before, you definitely are going to want to take a look at ActionController Metal and definitely take a look, start to profile and think about how including different features impact. So you can be more granular about implying performance impacting code to your speed performance parts, speed sensitive parts of your application. Okay, so let me look at these questions. I have like a minute and a half, I think. State of engines and templates. So cool thing, engines in Rails 3 actually inherit from Railties. So an engine is a special kind of Railtie. People should do their engines in gems probably, and then you get all the benefits of early loading and all the things that I talked about in terms of Railties, plus you get all the benefits of engines. So basically an engine gets first-class status as a Rails extension, just like it was ActiveRecord or something, but it also gets all the old benefits of engines. And we've been working with people like Pivotal, who have a plugin called Desert, which extends how engines work to sort of make a lot more use of how Rails, of the facilities that Rails already provides, and then give us feedback about what we can add. And that's been a pretty productive conversation. Okay, let's see what else. When is Rails 3 being released? I don't know. Okay.
Hey, Yehuda, I've just emailed you a list of questions that were backlogged. If you want to check your email and you could stick around in the chat and answer things, that would be great.
Okay. Let me just see if there's one more question I can answer. Can gem plugins add dependencies to Bundler? Yes. So actually, this is a good question, and I'll just answer it real quick. Gem plugins are gems, and Bundler itself just reads the gem spec. So if you have a gem plugin and you specify dependency in the gem spec, it will be involved in the entire dependency resolution process. So basically, the only time you need a special thing called gem file is in your own application because it's not already a packaged gem. Everything else just uses the normal Ruby gem system and the normal Ruby gems dependencies with the addition of doing a full dependency resolve. So yeah, I think people are going to get used to this, and it's going to be really cool, and I think move Ruby gems forward in a big way and make people feel a lot more comfortable with using Ruby gems. But there's definitely going to be a period where people have to re-remember how Ruby gems works and what it's supposed to do. All right, thank you very much. I will stick around and answer some of those questions. Thanks.